I never thought I would be the kind of person who falls in love quietly. I always imagined love would announce itself, that it would arrive with something you could point to, a date, a moment, a sentence that changed everything. But it didn't happen like that for me. It started with nothing dramatic. No grand confessions, no fireworks, no promises exchanged under the stars. Just conversations that stretched past midnight, random calls in the middle of the afternoon, a voice that somehow made ordinary moments feel safe. And somewhere in the quiet of all that, I fell. Not all at once, slowly. The way water fills a room, you don't notice until you're already in it. He made me feel seen, not in the way people tell you that you're beautiful or smart or funny. No, he made me feel seen in the way that matters most, like the parts of me I never showed anyone were exactly the parts he was looking for. And maybe that's why I stopped paying attention to the other things. The silence when I asked certain questions, the explanations that never quite added up, the parts of his life that always stayed just out of reach. I told myself, love doesn't need pressure. Maybe I was overthinking. Maybe that's just how some people are. So I gave him everything I had, my time, my attention, my softness, my trust, and he took it, like it was safe with him. But I didn't know. I was slowly falling in love with someone who was never fully mine. Not until one ordinary evening, when his phone lit up beside me. A message, with a name I had never seen before, and a heart emoji next to it. That was the moment everything started to change, even though I didn't understand it yet. Let me take you back to the beginning, because every love story has one, even the ones that don't end the way you planned. We met the way a lot of things happen now, not dramatically, not on purpose, just stumbled into each other's space, the way you sometimes stumble into a song you've never heard, but somehow already know all the words to. It was through a mutual friend, a casual group chat. He commented on something I said and I replied, and somehow the conversation kept going. I didn't think anything of it at first. He was just someone who was funny, someone who had good things to say, someone who made me feel less alone in a moment when I hadn't realized how alone I felt. The first real conversation we had lasted until 3 a.m. I remember looking at the time and thinking, how did that happen? We talked about everything, our families, our fears, the kind of things you don't usually share with someone you've only known for 3 hours. But it didn't feel rushed. It felt natural, like something that had been waiting to begin. He asked questions that nobody had ever asked me before, not surface-level things, but real ones. What makes you feel most like yourself? What's the thing you want most in life that you've never said out loud? And I answered him, honestly, completely, because something about his voice made me feel like it was safe. After that night, we talked every day. Not because we planned it, just because it happened. He'd text me something silly in the morning and I'd find myself smiling before I even got out of bed. He'd call in the evenings and we'd talk about nothing for hours. And somehow the nothing always felt like something. He remembered things, small things, that I hated the smell of coffee but loved the ritual of making it. That my favorite time of day was late afternoon when the light changes. That I always second-guessed myself before doing anything bold. He paid attention. And when someone pays that kind of attention to you, something inside you starts to trust them without even deciding to. I started to feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not just happy, not just comfortable, safe. Like I didn't have to perform, like I didn't have to edit myself, like I could just be exactly who I was, and it would be enough. There were small things I noticed, even then. Small things I filed away and then chose not to look at. He was vague about his schedule sometimes. Not always, just sometimes. He'd go quiet for a day and then reappear without explaining where he'd been. And I'd feel that little knot in my chest. And then he'd say something sweet or funny or just right, and the knot would loosen. I told myself, this is just how he is. He's not the type to check in constantly. That's fine. Not everyone is like that. And honestly, in the beginning I believed it. Because the good was so good. He made me feel like I mattered. Not in a loud, obvious way. In a quiet, consistent way that felt more real than anything I'd experienced before. And so I let myself fall. Slowly, completely, trusting every step. I didn't know I was building a home in someone who already had somewhere else to be. Months passed, and somewhere in those months, something started to shift. I didn't see it clearly at first. That's the thing about changes that happen gradually. They don't feel like changes. They feel like weather. Like one day is just a little colder than the last, and before you know it, winter is here and you never even saw it coming. He started taking longer to reply. Not always, just enough for me to notice. Enough for me to find myself checking my phone more than I used to. Enough for me to feel something I didn't want to name. When I asked if everything was okay, he'd say yes. He was just busy. Work was stressful. He needed space sometimes. And I said okay. Because I meant it. Because I didn't want to be the kind of person who couldn't give someone space. But the space kept growing. There was this one evening I remember clearly. We were sitting together, and his phone kept vibrating, not just once, again and again. He picked it up, looked at the screen, and then turned it face down on the table, casually, like it was nothing. And I told myself, people are allowed to have private conversations. That's normal. I'm not going to be suspicious over something like that. So I smiled. I kept talking. I pretended I hadn't noticed, but I had noticed. I always noticed. I just kept choosing not to look. The calls started too, late ones. After 10, he'd step outside and say it was work. And maybe it was. Probably it was. I had no reason not to believe him. Except that something in me had started keeping score. Not deliberately, not because I wanted to, but my heart was doing the math. Even when my mind told it to stop. I started asking more questions, gently, carefully, not accusations, just curiosity. Where were you earlier? How was your evening? Who were you with? And he'd answer, but the answers were always surface level. Always enough to technically respond, but never enough to actually satisfy. Like he was giving me the outline of a story but leaving out all the detail. And every time I felt the doubt rising in me, I'd talk myself out of it. You're overthinking. You've been hurt before, and now you're projecting. He's been consistent in all the ways that matter. Don't ruin something good because of your own anxiety. I'd say these things to myself like a mantra. Like if I believed them hard enough, they would be true. But the truth was, I was starting to feel lonely. Not alone, lonely. There's a difference. Being alone is just a state. Being lonely is a feeling you carry even when you're right next to someone. And I was starting to carry it everywhere I went. I'd lie next to him and feel a distance I couldn't explain. I'd talk to him and feel like parts of the conversation were happening somewhere I couldn't see. I'd reach for him and sometimes feel like I was reaching for someone who wasn't quite there. But I loved him, and love has this way of making you stay in rooms that have already gotten cold, of convincing you that if you just adjust yourself enough, the warmth will come back. So I stayed. I adjusted. I told myself it was just a phase. I told myself the version of the story I could survive, instead of the one that was actually being written. There is a moment in every story like this, where the thing you've been trying not to see becomes impossible to look away from. Mine came on a Tuesday, an ordinary Tuesday. Nothing special about it. We had spent the evening together, cooking something simple, talking about something I can't even remember now. It was comfortable. It felt like the version of us I loved most. He fell asleep on the sofa, and his phone lit up on the cushion beside him. I didn't mean to look. I wasn't trying to spy. The screen just lit up right there, and my eyes went to it the way eyes always do when something flashes in the dark. A name I didn't recognize, and next to the name, a little red heart. I told myself it was nothing. A friend, a cousin, someone from work. I put the phone down. I sat very still. I breathed. And I didn't sleep that night. Over the next few days, I paid attention differently. Not in a panicked way, not in a way I showed him, but quietly, carefully, I started connecting things I had been filing away for months. The evenings he was unavailable, the calls he took outside, the way he kept his phone screen angled just slightly away from me whenever we sat together. The answers that were technically correct, but emotionally hollow. The way he'd sometimes look at me with something in his eyes that I used to think was love, but now I wondered if it was guilt. And the picture that started forming wasn't the one I wanted to see. It was the one I had been trying to unsee for a long time. I asked him one night, quietly. We were sitting at the kitchen table, and I looked at him and I asked. I didn't make it dramatic. I didn't come in with evidence or accusations. I just asked him the question I had been too afraid to ask for months. Am I the only one? He didn't answer right away. He looked at the table. He shifted in his chair. He opened his mouth and closed it again. And in that silence, I already knew before he said a single word. Because the silence was the answer. The silence had always been the answer. I just hadn't been willing to hear it. He said it quietly. No shouting, no anger, no big dramatic confession. Just a few words that landed like stones in still water. I didn't think it was serious. I didn't think it meant anything. I thought I could manage it without hurting anyone. I sat very still and listened to him explain. And the strange thing was, I didn't cry. Not right then. I just sat there and let the words settle into me. The way cold air settles into a room when a window has been left open too long. He was sorry. He didn't want to lose me. He said he loved me. He said it was complicated. And I thought about all the times I had explained away his behavior using those exact kinds of words. All the times I had told myself, it's complicated. Love is complicated. People are complicated. And I realized I had been so busy making excuses for his complications that I never asked myself if this was the kind of complicated I deserved to live inside. What broke me wasn't the betrayal itself. It was the realization of what I had done to myself. I had noticed. I had seen the signs. I had felt the distance growing. And every single time, I had chosen the story that let me stay. Not because I was weak, but because I loved him. Because I wanted so desperately for the thing I had built in my heart to be real. And I had to sit with the understanding that real and true are not always the same thing. What I felt was real. What I believed about us was not. I thought about all the versions of this relationship I had carried in my head. The future I had quietly started imagining. The things I had stopped doing to make more room for him. The parts of myself I had softened, bent, tucked away, because I thought that was what love asked of you. And I grieved them. Not loudly, not in front of him, but somewhere inside me, in a place that doesn't have a name, I said goodbye to the version of the story I thought we were in. And I felt it leave. I left quietly. There was no scene, no final speech, no door slammed in punctuation. I just gathered myself slowly. and walked out of a story that had never been written for me to stay in. The days after were strange. Not the explosion of pain I expected, but something quieter, something that felt more like the aftermath of a storm than the storm itself. I'd wake up in the morning and have 1 second of peace before I remembered. And then I'd remember. And then I'd have to decide all over again to keep going. I thought about trust, about how it's not a thing you give once and it's done. It's something that gets built in 1,000 small moments. And I had been building it, genuinely, completely, offering every piece of myself with both hands. And I thought about love. About how loving someone with everything you have doesn't guarantee they're holding that love with the same care you're giving it. That's the thing nobody warns you about. You can love someone with your whole heart and still be left with nothing. Not because your love wasn't enough, but because the person you loved wasn't ready to receive it honestly. I want to say that I understood it all right away, that I had this moment of clarity where everything made sense, and I walked forward feeling healed and whole. But that's not how it works. It was slow. Some days felt like progress. Other days I'd find myself reaching for my phone, wanting to call him, missing the version of him I thought he was. But I kept walking. Because I understood finally that I had been pouring myself into something that had a leak in it I hadn't been allowed to see. And no matter how much you pour, you can't fill something that was never sealed. I learned something about myself through all of this. I learned that I am someone who loves deeply, who trusts fully, who shows up completely. And for a long time, I thought those things were the reasons I got hurt, but they're not. They are the best things about me, and whoever gets to receive them next will have to deserve them. Not just say they do, not just make me feel it in certain moments, but actually deserve them with honesty, with consistency, with nothing hidden. I thought I was loved, but I was just part of a story I didn't write. And the worst part is not that he lied to me, it's that I believed him completely. And if you've ever loved someone quietly, only to realize it wasn't the same for them, you'll understand this story more than I ever had to explain it. Subscribe to The Story Room, because some stories feel too real to forget.